I'm Alison. I work for a charity called Capital Mass, and we are part of the Diocese of London, which is the Church of England, and we exist to support and encourage parishes, churches, and we don't really care about the denomination, if I'm honest, but we want to see churches really encouraged to and be equipped to help people in their local communities, whatever the need that might be. And particularly this month we're spending looking at how we particularly encourage and equip local parishes around money and around debt, because we know that before COVID happened, this was a huge issue in London, and it's only going to get worse with all the economic fallout of lockdown and everything else. So we're very concerned that churches are going to be seeing more and more of this in the next few weeks, months and years, and we'd love to equip and encourage you to have resources really to support people who you meet. So thanks for coming. This hour we're going to look at specifically what can you do around debt, and specifically people who are really struggling with their money, who might be in arrears, might be worrying about evictions, that kind of thing, people who we'd call were in financial crisis. So we're going to have an hour with three brilliant, I'm going to say experts, but I don't think they'd like to describe themselves as experts, but they're brilliant, they're very experienced people who are all working in different organisations, all responding to this. So we've got Steve, who's from Community Money Advice, who are a charity that support churches to set up independent debt advice centres and help them offer with all that sort of training, and Steve will talk about that in a minute. We have Eddie, who is part of St Stephen's Twickenham and a Crosslight debt advisor, and Crosslight are an organisation that are sort of part of Community Money Advice, and Crosslight run debt centres across West London and Kent through churches again. So Eddie's an on the ground advisor, and then Debbie Thomas is our CAP Money. Now you're a debt centre manager, is that right? I was going to say that's right. So Debbie runs a debt centre at St Gabriel's Cricklewood through CAP. So we're going to hear all three of them in different questions. I'm going to come to Steve first, if that's all right, Steve. Because your role is, you both work, you offer debt advice and run, and you've got experience of that on the ground in Watford, but you also are operations support manager for the whole of the southeast for churches and community groups. Is that right?
Yeah. So
Community Money Advice, you will partner with churches and community groups to set up sort of the debt advice centres, basically.
Yes, absolutely, both. Yeah.
Brilliant, lovely. So I mean, I think the first question is, for me, is sort of why is this important that the church does this? Why should the church be involved in this work? Isn't it the work of citizens advice bureaus?
I think there's probably three elements to this answer. Now, I will say I'm no theologian, but I'm going to start on a theological point. I'd say that there is a biblical imperative. I mean, we all know that, or most of us will know, that the Bible has many, many references to money. I'm told around 2,000. I've never actually counted them, but that's what I've been told. And Jesus himself talked about money and possessions considerably. So there's guidance there and wisdom for us as Christians. And therefore you could say, well, actually it's part of our calling as Christians to pass that on to other people and to encourage other people that have got issues with debt or money. It's also our gospel calling to bring good news, to release the captives, and to set the oppressed free, to paraphrase Jesus there. And people in our communities are oppressed and chained down and imprisoned by debt. And so therefore I feel it's part of our calling to address that in some way. I think secondly, debt is a huge problem. There are all sorts of stats out there about debt. If you want to look any up, there's a organisation called the Money Charity, and they have monthly stats on their website that you can look at. But we know that debt is a problem. We know that people are being driven to food banks, and part of the reasoning for that is debt. And we know that through this COVID period, there are all sorts of issues that are coming out of it. But I mean, to quote one stat, the Office for Budget Responsibility says that household debt is running at £2 trillion. Now, I can't even envisage what £2 trillion is, but all I know is that is a very big number. And so that, points to the fact that there will be an issue in our communities. And I think the other point around this is this is about relationships. Through this kind of work, you can actually build relationships with people in your community that you might not otherwise ever come across. And you can also build relationships with other local organisations that may well refer people in. Problem debt is no respecter of what the people look like on the outside. So problem debt can be a problem for someone in a small rented flat or a large mortgaged property. I know from our centres they will have clients that come from all sorts of backgrounds, and so if we as people of God want to see communities transformed, then obviously we need to reach out to where people are hurting, and debt is something, and money issues is something where people are hurting.
Brilliant, thank you. I think that's, yeah, absolutely. I think that the scale of the issue, I think, can be very hidden, can't it? Because people don't talk about money, and particularly in church and with church communities, we don't talk about it. But the scratch the surface, and so many people struggle with money without talking about it. So, I mean, if someone is in debt, what does that mean in terms of when would someone need to come to a debt advice centre as opposed to just having a chat with their mum?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we're really talking about, is because most people have debt of some sort. The question is whether it's manageable or not. And debt becomes a problem when it's not manageable. If you've got people that are only ever making the minimum repayment on their credit cards, if they're constantly in overdraft, and various other circumstances, those are the times when actually people really need to get some help. One organisation did some research a while ago, and they said that from the time they did some research among their clients, and from the time that people started to get into debt or have money issues, to the time when they actually sought help was on average a year.
Wow. So people really carry this, and then the implications of that are people's relationship, stress, anxiety, mental health. There's a huge amount, isn't there? So basically it's when people are in debt that is not manageable, they need to seek help, basically. And what can church run debt centres offer? There's some brilliant other organisations that do debt advice, aren't there?
Absolutely. Mark here is from a CAB. So yes, I mean there are other organisations out there, but I mean churches are there. There's a church virtually on every street corner. So actually, in terms of a place to go to, there's lots of them. There are a number of things that churches can do, and obviously that it will come out during the course of this session, I think, as other people speak about what the options are. It can be anything from just signposting to a local service, offering budgeting support, or indeed offering some more specific money support or debt help to people. So there are various, as I say, there are various things that churches can do to support people.
Yeah, so I think there is a role to play for the church, and if the church offers debt advice, they can often do it for people who might not otherwise access services. Is that your experience in Watford?
Yep. Yes. Yeah. I mean, people, and also because in some areas, I mean, CAB, for example, do a great job, but in some areas, CABs have shut. Or actually they're just overwhelmed with demand. So there are lots of people that, even though they may not have a faith as such, they do see churches as a kind of a safe place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there's that trusted relationship, hopefully. Yeah. Absolutely. And do you want we'll come on to the details of if churches are interested in sort of pursuing this specifically later, but can you just talk us a little bit about community money advice and what different things you do with churches?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to say a little bit about our background, or do you want me to cover
Yes,
that
yeah,
later?
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, CMA has been going since the late 1990s. We're a support organisation. Community Money Advice has a network of independently run centres across the country that we provide a support service to, and there are various aspects of that support. As an organisation, we are accredited by the Money and Pension Service, and we have a training programme which is also accredited by the Money and Pension Service. And we are really there. We provide a range of support to centres to be able to offer some form of debt help to people. Essentially, two main models that we run. This is going to be very, very brief. Details can be picked up at a later date. One model is what we would call our full debt advice model, whereby people are the church, people in the church are trained and supported and enabled to offer a full range of debt advice help to people, which is it's authorized, has to be authorized by the Financial Conduct Authority, but we provide all the support to actually go through that. And then you can then work with a client. I mean, in fact, both models are about walking with the client through a process. So that's the model that we've predominantly used over time. Then the second model is one that we've introduced more recently, which we called CMA Connect, which is where rather than having debt advisors in your church, you have money mentors. And then we have something called the CMA Hub, and it's the hub that provides the specific work around working out the debt options for someone. So the church in that situation doesn't have to be FCA authorised, and therefore different things work for different churches. So it's another option. The church is still the primary contact point for the person or the family that is being helped. But it's just that you don't have some of the other aspects of going, of the debt advice side of it to deal with. But you're very much part of the loop, and the ongoing contact between the church and the hub is vital. So those are essentially our two models.
Great, wonderful, thank you. Well, I say if people are interested in more, I will send information round afterwards, an email with all the links and things. If that's something that you think, oh, I'd like to know more about that, please do follow those links. Thanks, Steve, that's really helpful. Okay. I'd love to come to Eddie now, who's actually, Eddie, you are a debt advisor, and Crosslight is part of the community money advice model, isn't it? So do you want to talk a little bit about your work as a debt advisor on the ground in the Diocese of London?
Yeah, so about 7 years ago, I think it was December 2013, somebody at St. Stephen's, which is in East Twickenham, had a vision, a calling, I don't know what, that we should think about debt advice. We had a meeting with about 7 or 8 of us, and from that, we took the decision that it was something where we would dip our toe in the water. We weren't exactly sure whether there was a need for it. Twickenham, Richmond are seen as being affluent areas. I know now, 7 years later, that deprivation is hidden away between all of the affluent areas, and sometimes people don't even realize it's there. We did 5 of us did a CMA course, 3-day course, which was excellent, and got qualified as debt advisors. And from there on, we did training with Crosslight as we sat in at centres in Hammersmith and Kensington at the established Crosslight centres. And we really learnt the ropes just by observing what other advisors were doing, and Crosslight supported us. We decided to set up a centre through Crosslight for various reasons, which we can come on to. But what we then subsequently did was we decided that we would have a centre in Twickenham, supported by St. Stephen's Church, but it is a separate charity. So we set up a charity, we got charity authorisation, which is really quite helpful for funding purposes. And it means that the finances of the charity are separate from the PCC and the church. And you do have more control over what you're doing, but I think it is very important to have the backing of the church. The majority of our advisors come from St. Stephen's, but we do have people now who are non-church members, and I think it's a really excellent way of drawing people in to, the Christian mission to help people and into the church community. And we're finding that that is working really well. So much so now that I don't know what the percentage is, but maybe 25% of our team are not members of St. Stephen's. We hope they will be, but who knows? And so from there, we've really become a part of Crosslight. We've become a branch of Crosslight. As you said, Alison, Crosslight has got centres in West London and Kent. The Kent ones came as part of a merger, and Crosslight has supported us right the way through. The advantage of being a member of a network, I think, of churches is that you can get the central support. We get the central support from Crosslight Central Office. We get all of the computer support. We get all of the administration that you need to have these days to be authorized to do this sort of work, quality control, AQS, and all of that sort of thing. So that but we also have our own independence, which is good. So you've got both sides of the coin there. We've been going now we set the charity up in 2015. So we've just had our 5-year anniversary. Crosslight is 10 years old. And Kent, who joined us about 18 months ago, was established, I think, 20 years ago. So as a whole, Crosslight has got, I think now, 9 or 10 centres, and about somewhere between 150 and 200 volunteers, and about between 5 and 10 paid staff. So we're very volunteer based, and I think that's very important. What we do locally is we're having trouble with face-to-face at the moment, and COVID has been a real challenge. We see about 70 clients a year. On average, we would work with a client for 12 months, sometimes much longer than that. I mean, we've just finished with somebody who we've been working with for 3 years. So we really deep dive. And what you discover, I think, with debt counselling is that it's much more about emotion and walking with people, and it is about being able to add up columns of figures. If you think you need an accountancy qualification, forget it. You need a social work qualification to do this. And you need to know about, somebody has said earlier about all of the complications and the intricacy of debt advice, because one thing leads on to another. It's not a single subject. It's not a single subject. You're dealing with all of the things that we've mentioned, addiction, homelessness, and you name it, it's there. And it's very difficult to draw the line. So we link with other organizations, other churches. St. Stephen's has done various church plants, and we attend the cafe, or we did attend the cafe twice a month at St. Paul's Hounslow West. St. Paul's Hounslow West now has become a massive food bank, and we're not sort of mingling with the people at the cafe and the food bank at the moment, but there are 1 or 2 referrals still coming through. There are other local charities like Riverbank, which is for single mums who refer people to us. These are mostly church connections, but we do get referrals from non-church organizations as well. So yeah, we're spread. Elizabeth, I mean, we've had conversations with St. Mary's at Hampton with Ben a couple of years ago. So we're working with certainly. I say working with. We're certainly working with St. Paul's Hounslow West. We're very close to them. And we'd be very happy to, Crosslight would be very happy to support any other churches locally in West London that wanted to set up. I mean, when we started, we had somebody loaned to us to get us going for the first 6 months. while we sort of learn to jump into the pool. But now we're self-sufficient.
And supporting others, providing other people to go out to be loaned out. Wonderful. Thank you, Eddie. That's really helpful to hear how it's been, the journey it's been for your church, and where you've gone, the decisions that you've made, and I say you've been involved since the beginning, really, in terms of the debt advice. What sort of skills have you? I mean, you talked a bit about it's listening, it's social work. What sort of issues do you see people coming to you with, and how, what's your journey through?
I think you have to be non-judgmental. People sometimes say to me, well, how do people get into this situation? And I think everybody on this call understands how people get into debt, but it's usually a complicated and intricate web of broken relationships, of health problems, of addiction, of breakups of relationships, and so on and so forth. But you have to be able to listen, you have to be compassionate, you have to create a feeling of trust, because it becomes very personal. You have people sit in front of you who completely break down and cry and tell you long stories about what's happened to them. And if you can't listen, they will go away, because what they want as much as anything is to talk to somebody and to feel that they're being noticed. One of our clients said, when I came to Crosslight, it was the first time I felt that somebody was listening to me, the first time I felt that I was noticed and that I was a person. And it's that, I think, relationship aspect of it, rather than the money aspect of it, that really, over the years, I've realized is the more important thing about what we do. I mean, you have to be able to deal with figures. You have to be able to look at people's financial situation and draw up a financial statement. But if you can't empathize with people, and if you don't have that compassionate heart that I think comes from, not exclusively, but as Steve said, comes from the teaching of Jesus in the Bible, and from a passage in Isaiah as well, then I think you're not going to do such a good job.
Brilliant, thank you. So actually, it's at the heart and the root of what you do is your faith, and the way that you treat people and see people as whole people. Brilliant, thank you. And we might come back to it in shortly, but I'm just keen. We want to hear from Debbie as someone else who's doing this work in a different way, in a different part of London. But I'm sure there's probably lots of crossover. Debbie, just coming to you. So can you talk to me a little bit? So you run the Debt Advice Centre in St Gabriel's, Cricklewood, and you are part of the Christians Against Poverty CAP network, and you've been doing that for a couple of years. Tell me a little bit about your experience of how that's been, taking that on, and what it's meant for you as a church, really.
So we've had a debt centre in St Gabriel's for the last 9 years. So it was already established, but the debt manager stepped down and I took over. What it's meant is that the people in our community, we're in the borough that's 50% deprivation, that we can see clients. To be honest, we just get them coming and being booked into our diaries sort of 3 months in advance, because the need is so great. But yeah, what it's meant for the church is that we can share the stories of people that are in debt, and like the other gentlemen have said, the debt is never really the issue. It's an outcome of a sickness or a change in their circumstance, which any of us can go through, that has led them to become in debt. So it could be a marriage breakdown, it might be a bereavement, it might be an accident, something has happened in their lifetime that has caused them to become in debt, and they do take 12 months before they get in touch with us. So by that time, the debt is pretty much quite hard. So what we do is, as a debt centre, is we share those stories with the church as part of the congregation, just to keep the congregation aware of what we're doing and the types of people we're helping. And of course, we're inviting those people to come to our church, to be part of our church community. And sometimes they come and sometimes they don't, or sometimes they come now and again. But the point is that they're always felt welcome and warmed whenever they come to church. So yeah, it's been really rewarding as part of my role.
Absolutely. And like yeah, and knowing that there's that much need out there must be quite difficult with managing that when you've got sort of a huge waiting list, and I can imagine with COVID that's only going to get worse. So so I guess that the message is seek help, but you might have to wait for it a little bit.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why we're now thinking of expanding the debt centre and having Emma on board, which is great, by the way, is that we can then start to think about things like drop-in centres. So whilst you might be on the waiting list, we can have a conversation with you to say, sorry, it's going to take a while to come to see us, but actually let's have a bit of a chat. You get to know me, I get to know you, and then if we can't help, then we can signpost them elsewhere. So rather than waiting 3 months and then be told, you know, for some reason or other we won't be able to help, then they can seek that advice earlier on, and in the meantime they can start getting the paperwork ready, so when we do start the conversations, we hit the ground running.
Brilliant. Yeah, so there's things you can do in preparation for seeing the actual advisor. And just in terms of, I know each organisation has its own timeline, but just roughly what sort of things does it take for a church if they were thinking of setting up a debt centre? Sort of how long will it take? You know, money, that kind of. We'll talk about. I mean, each one is different cost, but just talk about how long it take. I mean, you probably weren't involved at the very beginning, but
no, I wasn't involved. But I would say so you've got to find somebody who you're happy to run your debt centre. They would be similar to me, a debt manager. They need to go off and get training. You need to make sure that you have the funding for it. But I would say it would take about 3 or 4 months. Because you've got to set it up, you've got to promote it, people have to know in your area that you've got it, you might want to do some press advertising. There's quite a huge amount that you need to do, particularly if you're just starting off as a debt centre. But CAPAR, Christians Against Poverty, are there to help you kind of every step of the way on that journey. But it's not, you know, go on to get somebody, train them up, and then you're ready to go. It does take a bit of, and you might even want to start with I've seen some churches that start off with an opening ceremony. Do you know what I mean? So you almost, you know, kind of like, we're open now, come and see us. But obviously, particularly through COVID, that's going to be a really challenging time, and things to think about.
Absolutely. So it's not a quick undertaking. So it's something that a church really needs to think about. Make sure you've got buy-in from the church, and obviously there's a cost involved as well. Absolutely. If a church says, well, actually, I can't do that now. Yeah. What else? But I see that this is an issue. What else could churches do?
So a couple of things. So first of all, just in terms of the funding, you would need to ensure that you've got your funding, because the funding is a big part, because we're paid for the role we do. You do obviously over your hours, but you pay your staff who are running your debt centre, unless they don't want to be paid, and you also have to pay CAP. So you have to make sure that you have that money aside. And the way we do it in our church is we are funded by church members, and we do a system called CAP Angel. So we ask people to contribute as a CAP Angel towards the debt centre, and that's on top of their giving. So just, I can talk a bit about that with people that may want to know more, but the funding is a big part of the role. You have to ensure that you're funded, otherwise you'll come into issues of sustainability. In terms of other things you can do, you could perhaps run a CAP money course, which is a lot less intensive, and that costs a lot less, but it means that you can get people through the budgeting. And the great thing about CAP money is if there are people where their budget is not adding up, so they're actually spending more than they're getting in, we have something called the CAP Money Plus, so they will get debt advice but on the telephone. So that's one thing you could do. Obviously signposting, you can volunteer, and I would suggest that everybody finds out what's in their local area. So if you can't run a debt centre, at least you can signpost to someone else. And the other thing one of our churches does, they're smaller, so they can't run a debt centre as such, and they only have about 10 or 15 staff, but what they do is they contribute to our debt centre. The way that CAP works, you have a certain amount of postcode attachments, and I cover their postcode, so they contribute to my debt centre because they can't run it themselves, but they can help fund the work that we're doing.
Brilliant. So whether it's Crosslight, Community Money Advice or CAP, if there's a debt centre running near you, or at least that covers your area, as a church, one way would just be knowing to signpost to it. Yeah. And perhaps then offering, and also volunteering, would that be another thing? That
volunteering, yes. So every debt centre needs a number of volunteers. So if you can't contribute, you can always give up your time, so you could come along with somebody. But pre-COVID, we go into people's homes, so you need somebody to come along with you, so you could always volunteer your time to do that. And the other thing you could do is just have a speaker event, just find out a bit more about how you can help debt organisations by having somebody come in and promote the debt services that are available in the area.
Absolutely, yeah. So even if you don't think it's something you can do right now, there's ways of partnering. One of the things that we're going to do is put together a map across the diocese of where all the free church-run debt advice is, so that you'd know where to signpost to. And if you're in a hole, then maybe it's where there isn't anything. Maybe that's a stirring from God. But actually, if there is something already running, not that you shouldn't think about setting something else up, but if you're not able to, there's ways to get involved, whether that's volunteering, giving, praying, or just signposting. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Debbie. Lots and lots more questions. I'm aware we haven't, we've got lots to cover, and there's probably more that we haven't asked. I'm just going to, I think the question, so Mark has said in Enfield, lovely to see you, Mark, that it's taken you 4 years to get to where you are at now, and you'll be up and running in March, April next year. So it's not a quick process, but you're doing it as a group of churches, aren't you? You're doing an ecumenical team, is that right?
There's several churches working together. We've got about 13 churches together working on it.
So it's quite a team. That's it,
yeah.
Right,
so I mean, it's taking time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a beautiful thing to do, but these things, unity never happens quickly, does it really? But it's wonderful. But it's taken you a while, and but you're on the journey, and you're on the way there, which is great. Brilliant. Julia, your question, do you want to ask it, or shall I ask it?
Obviously, coming from the point of view more from a credit union, but also the citizens' advice side, I just wondered how you guys that do fund centres, how that relationship works. If it does, maybe you don't have that relationship, or you wish you did. What have you sort of learned about how that can work really well, or what do you wish that you'd known when you sort of started out?
So working with other local agencies, either for referrals or work together and that kind of thing. Is that, yeah. Eddie, Steve, Debbie, who wants to come in on that? Eddie, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I think it's incredibly important. So we belong to there's the Council for Voluntary Services, which is the sort of network organisation of local agencies and local charities. There's the CAB facilitates in our area a meeting about 3 times a year of different agencies, and so we learn about what's going on. The council does a similar thing, and I think it's incredibly important that we do go to these meetings, and we are seen. We network quite a lot, and that's quite time consuming as well. Networking and making somebody's sort of mentioned about getting out there and making your presence known, because if you don't do that, then you won't get the referrals. I would say the majority of our clients come through referrals from other organisations and from the churches themselves, from people that know us. Some come from previous clients, so the longer you're going, the more clients come back with their friends and their neighbours who need help. And some clients self-refer, but I would say that's not the majority. So having those links with with the local charities and the local organisations, help organisations, like Richmond Aid, for instance, deal with people with disability. They refer quite a few people to us, and we sometimes go and have meetings at their premises if people can't come because of wheelchair access and stuff like that. We go to them. I mean, generally we're not like CAP. We don't go into people's homes as normally. That's just a different way of working. We want them to come to us, but we do sometimes go and have meetings with people at other agencies, and so we will find support workers, social workers quite often bring in clients because they need the support of somebody they know, at least for the first meeting, but then usually they come on their own after that. And we've had people who are deaf or who are dumb, all sorts of people with one sort of disability of one sort or another who need support. And it's great to work with another support worker. If somebody has got a support worker, having a link with them makes the job a lot easier.
So being present in the community and being known about is really important, so people can refer to you. Debbie, do you want to talk a little bit about, I think, how you found that? I know CAP have a slightly different way of referring, don't they?
Yeah, so our referral, I think our referrals are two ways. So if I were to see a client who had, I don't know, rent arrears or was about to be evicted, then I would actually refer on to citizens advice for some help, or maybe, you know, a solicitor or someone that can help. And then they would refer to me. So they would let me know if there's somebody who needs help, and I can help them, and they're within my postcode. So for me, it works two ways. So our referral systems are joint, you know, for things that I can't do, they can help, and vice versa. So it works really well that way.
Brilliant. Yeah, and you get quite a lot of referrals because CAP have a central number, don't they, based in Bradford, where people can call up, and then you get cascaded, so you'll get the referrals in from there.
Yeah. So basically we have a centralized function based out of Bradford. So anybody who wants CAP help, or if they've seen our leaflet, they ring a centralized number, and then the first question would be, are you within a catchment area that has a debt centre? And all our debt centres are joined with a church, so it's a partnership. It's the church, the debt centre and CAP kind of, you know, working together, and that's how we would then get filtered down into be able to seeing clients depending on our postcode catchment area. Yeah.
So different models of referral for different organisations. Steve, have you got anything you'd like to add on that, or is that all?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's covered it really, but I think it's key really for any whatever kind of support service you're running from the church. To have that relationship with other groups and agencies. Now, some churches, particularly if you're involved with Food Bank, may already know quite a number of agencies across the area. But otherwise, it is important to know who is in your patch, what sort of services they're offering, because people that run, whether it's homeless charities trying to get people back into accommodation, whether it's children's centres, and a variety of other organisations, will be working with people and would be grateful for additional support, particularly if they've got someone with money issues. So actually helping others to know that you are there for them.
Yeah, brilliant.
Sorry, just a quick point. That's a really good point that Steve just mentioned. One of the things we do is we work very closely with our food bank, so that if the food bank were to get in conversation with someone and they talked about debt help, then they could give them a leaflet, and they could then, you know, so we work very closely just so that we can tie up and identify those that need debt needs.
I think that's really key, and I think one of the interesting things is because food banks have just had this massive growth, haven't they? And now so many churches are running those kind of food banks. Actually, conversations about money, because we'll go to a food bank not because they're hungry, but because they have no money to buy food. People don't want, you know, so it's actually a money issue that takes someone to a food bank. Perhaps conversations about money are happening more there than they ever have been. So actually, that is a point at which to say, well, if you need some more practical help for money, then do signpost on. And I guess that's, Eddie, why you got involved in the food bank at Hounslow.
At St Paul's, yes, and you've been there and you've seen how it works. So, you know, we would go and sit down and have a cup of coffee with somebody, and out of that would come the fact that they were having money problems. People don't tell you straight away that they're having money problems, and it comes after a conversation of, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes. And of course we can't do that now. So what we're doing is we've just decided that the way to reach people who are going to the food banks, and I think they've seen, you know, threefold increase in the number of people that they're serving at the food bank. We're going to put leaflets in each food bank parcel, at least for the first few weeks, so that people can take those leaflets away and they know that the help is there as a, you know, substitute for being at the cafe on a regular basis. Seems to be a good way of reaching out to people.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the issue, isn't it, with post-COVID? People aren't physically meeting and having those informal conversations where you might pick up on a comment that someone makes and then be able to follow up. And that's a really good idea, putting them in the leaflets. Yeah, Mark, I would say, any other questions? Mark, do ask away.
Yeah, it's really just as a debt advisor at Citizens Advice, just a few sort of practical points that might be of use to people who are on the call. whether it's in terms of sort of encouraging people to take debt advice or whether you're actually meeting with them. But just from my experience, I think one of the key things when people come to us that they feel as though their situation is hopeless, there's no way out. But in my experience, there is always a way of improving their situation. It may well be just trying to organise repayment offers with their creditors, or it may well be things like insolvency, debt relief orders, or bankruptcy. But it's all like all these things, and I think it might have been Steve that mentioned it earlier, the sooner people engage with us, the easier it is to resolve their situations. I think one of the other things always worth saying is that people always think that their creditors are never going to agree to anything that they put to them in terms of an offer, but often creditors are much more sympathetic than we think they might be, and they clearly are at the moment because they have to be, because the Financial Conduct Authority is telling them to be. But often but even outside that, I've had clients who've had debts written off, and where they've accepted very, very small offers, £1 a month, that sort of thing. So it's always worth just remembering that if you're talking to people and trying to get people into debt advice. We've talked about that it's good to talk about money. I know it's come up on one or two of the other webinars, but I think this is where the churches particularly can provide a lot of support and just helping people through the debt advice process, and encouraging people to go to appointments or engage over the phone, which I think most people are doing now. Clearly, because money is a taboo subject, and people aren't that confident about talking about it. And the final thing, which again churches can help with, just trying to encourage people, and I don't think it's come up so far, is trying to get clients to actually open their post. It might sound a very small thing, but and there's big barriers as to why people do it. Often it's mental health. Often it's well, if I don't open the post, then I don't, that problem isn't there. It's going away. But anything that you can do, or we as the church can do to encourage people to do that, again, it just helps people face their problems, and also it might be a way to encourage them to go and get debt advice in the first place. So I just thought I'd say that, that might be useful for one or two people.
Thank you. Yeah, hugely useful. Thanks, Mark. And as someone who's, presumably you have queues at CAB, very long queues of people who come to you. Actually, maybe one job that the church can do is, if we can't actually offer that financially regulated debt advice, is get people ready for debt advice. So talk to them, open post, have conversations, and all that to make it quicker when you do get there. Absolutely. Yeah. Julia, quick question. You've got your quick question. Yeah.
No, it's not really a question. Just to echo what Mark said there. The number one thing that creditors want, with my creditor hat on in the credit union, obviously we are sort of the good guys if there's a spectrum of creditors, but what we want is for people to talk to us. If people don't talk to us, we have no idea what's going on. We have to assume that it won't pay rather than can't pay. And we often struggle to get people to engage with us. We are not unreasonable. We understand that things happen in people's lives, and I think the majority of creditors are the same. There's one or two outliers. You all know who they are, but the majority of creditors. I mean, that would be the message. If I had one thing that you guys could help with, it's actually admitting that you might have a problem is the worst bit. Once you've done that, and the relief that people feel just from having spoken to somebody and just sort of saying, somebody sort of saying, you know what, I've seen a lot worse and they've sorted it out. You can do it as well. It's not. I mean, I wouldn't ever. I'm sure Mark would agree. It's not. Sometimes it's not an easy thing. Sometimes it involves, having a good hard look at your lifestyle and your spending and everything. And I wouldn't like to sort of say that it is easy, but actually, it is always with a solution. Always.
Absolutely.
It is hard for people to see that.
It's a huge thing to face, but if our message when we're doing this is there is hope, things can change and creditors will listen, actually that's a really positive, good news that we can give to people who are struggling with money. Absolutely. We've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm aware there's loads we haven't covered. There's a couple of things I didn't mention in the chats with Steve and Debbie. I'd just like to make sure people are clear of. So Debbie, do you want to talk a little bit, because the way that CAP works is you're not a debt advisor, you manage the relationship. So that's you're not. Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So just to make it clear, so I'm the frontline worker. So I'm the person that a client would see, and I would build a relationship. I would go with Emma or a befriender, and we would build a relationship. We would come into their homes. We would bring the hope that Alison's talking about, and we would also offer them to pray. So we're proud of being Christians, but obviously we respect what they say. But just to make it clear, the head office comes from the debt advisors in Bradford. So we would send up all the information to Bradford, and they would then give it back to me, and then I would communicate that advice. So it's never our opinion, it comes from Bradford, and we literally read it to them. But if they have any questions, we're obviously there to answer and walk them through. And then when they move off to a long-term team, which they do after their third visit, we stay in the background, inviting them to church, asking them how they're getting along, that type of thing. So just wanted to make it clear we're not doing advice. Just to come up on what Julia said, what I found with a couple of my clients is they find a very different situation when they're talking to creditors. So the creditors are like, I need £10 from you, I need £15 from you, I'm not going to accept any less. And then we get on the phone as a charity, and it's a completely different tone. So I think sometimes that's why clients stay away from ringing the creditors, because they must have a script and they go with a certain way, and then clients feel very intimidated about that conversation. So they would prefer us to do it.
Yeah, having that person in the middle actually is really important, that intermediary. Yeah. So I think one of the differences between the community money advice model and the CAP model is that CAP, you're not trained as a debt advisor. Bradford do all that. And that's your relationship manager. I think, Steve, just for community money advice, you and Eddie are both debt advisors, and you offer you offer advice on the ground, and you are trained and regulated, and there's a difference in cost there as well, isn't there? I think, because Steve, just want to comment a little bit about that.
Yes, indeed. So with our two models, one is the people in the local church or local centre are the trained debt advisors, and there is in terms of costing, just to give you some headlines on it. With all these things, there are other aspects that you need to consider as a local church. But as a headline, it's 500 to affiliate, and then it's 1,050 per annum. With our Connect model, which is closer to the CAP model, it's not exactly the same, but it's closer to the CAP model. Then that is, again, it's 500 up front to get through the kind of all the initial processes, and then goes out at $12.95 per annum. So those are the sort of costings that we are looking at for us.
Yeah. So, and it's different. Again, it's different, and I think CAP have a different model of money, and we can come to that. I'll send that round as well. So there is a cost involved. It will take a bit of time. I think that's honest. But it's absolutely, I think from what you've said, it's vital, it needs doing, and churches are doing it, and actually it's making a massive difference in the community. So I'm aware we've run out of time, I'm afraid. I could carry on talking about this. I hope we've at least started the conversation for you. Eddie, Steve, Debbie, thank you so much for all you've shared. It's been brilliant to hear. I feel like we've rushed through lots and we've probably missed bits out. But if any of you would like to get in touch with Debbie or Steve or Eddie, they've all said they're happy to be contacted about more options and going forward. This is something to be thinking about. And as I said, there's other sessions we've done as well around, if you don't think you can do a debt centre, but you might want to just start a money management course, or you might want to have conversations around money. There's things that you can do to start those processes off. But opening a debt centre is a hugely worthwhile thing that you might want to think about doing as a church. So we really encourage you to think and pray about it.